Honored now to have the second of our three exclusive WGCH interviews with the candidates running for the position of governor. We had Ned Lamonts on, the Democrat, a Greenwich resident, and now we have Oz Griebel. He's the independent candidate. He led the Metro Hartford Alliance for 17 years, the region's largest organization of business leaders. And he joins us now. Thanks for calling in, Oz. How are you?
My pleasure, Jim. Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, I'll start with this with Ned as well. I came here 35 years ago, and this state was in the top three in quality of life, business friendliness, fiscal state. We're now in the bottom three in the state of our fiscal affairs and in business friendliness. What are you going to do to make Connecticut great again and that differs from the major party candidates?
Well, it's a great question, Jim, and it's right on the proverbial money, if you will. I've been in the state 25 years and believe that running as an independent is the only way that we can bring the two parties together, particularly the moderates in both parties, along with the private sector. We operate in this state in silos, and unless we take advantage of the single most important asset we have in the state, which is the intellectual capital we have, and the bulk of that is in the private sector, we're not going to make the progress we want. We've said that only an independent candidate can do that, and when you look at 30 years of no net job growth in the state, no net job growth that's resulted in more taxes at higher rates, and yet we've still underinvested in transportation and education. We've not provided adequate funding for a number of our social service organizations that deal with those who are dealing with mental health and substance abuse issues, and we've resulted in the out-migration of many people at all ages and all income levels. And as I said, only an independent candidate can break this logjam of the duopoly, where the two parties are focused primarily on who gets reelected, whose dogma is dominating, and not focused on Connecticut residents, taxpayers, and employers. And that's the fundamental difference between the ticket that Monty Frank and I are leading as opposed to what either Bob Stefanowski or Ned Lamonts are proposing.
And you think you can get stuff done in Hartford as an independent, and as you know, Bonnie Frank is a Democrat.
Yeah, Bonnie Frank's a former Democrat, re-registers an unaffiliated voter. I'm a lifelong Republican, re-registers an unaffiliated voter. And yes, I believe when the electorate sends Monty and me to the governor and lieutenant governor's office, to that executive branch, it will send the biggest shock to the Capitol that it's ever had. And what I mean by that is it breaks and it gives people what I'll call the electorate, the senator or legislator who wants to focus on Connecticut taxpayers, residents, and employers, an opportunity to work together, as opposed to having to salute the dogma of the caucuses. And those are the things that dominate. If you want to get ahead in the legislature, you want a better parking space, you want a better title, you want the opportunity to move up to the next level, run for another office, you've got to swear allegiance to that caucus dogma. And that's what that's the opportunity that Monty and I bring to the table. We get to break that dogma and provide a venue, provide a forum in which those legislators who want to work for the common good have that opportunity.
All right, you've run a very credible campaign, Oz. You hit 11% in the polls. The Sacred Heart Hearst that's just out today, you're at 8%. What do you tell folks who like you, like your policies, but don't think you can win and feel like they're wasting a vote then?
It's a great question, Jim, and it drives me a little crazy because I'll say a couple things. Anybody who votes goes into the ballot, to the poll, to vote for the lesser of two evils, to me is really abandoning their civic duty. Vote for the people. Don't try to figure out how your neighbor's going to vote or how someone 100 miles away is going to vote. Don't even try to figure out how your spouse is going to vote. Vote for the ticket that you believe is bringing the relevant expertise, the relevant experience, the relevant commitment to the state. That's what this is about. The second thing we'll say is that we just remember the 2.1 million voters in the state, 900,000 are registered as unaffiliated voters. Doesn't mean they don't lean to the left, to the Republican or Democratic ideas, but they have decided not to register for the party. That sends a huge signal. We have every confidence we're going to pick up a big chunk of that vote. And then you've got the Democratic and Republican members who aren't satisfied with either of their two candidates. And we provide that genuine third option. The last thing we'll say on this is that, or two last things I'd say, Jim, is that remember that we don't need a majority of the votes. This is with three people, you need a plurality. So this notion of being the spoilers are the two major party candidates. As we've said, if either one of them are elected, if I say we're going to win on November 6th, the Putin and the Russians were able to come in and throw the election to either one of them, you're going to get 4 more years of the last 30, 4 more years of partisan victory, 4 more years of whose dogma is in charge. And I say to folks, does anybody think that Bob Stefanowski could convince one Democrat in the legislature to repeal the personal income tax? or that Ned Lamonts could convince one Republican to vote in support of the minimum wage to $15 on July 1st. We're going to continue 4 more years of no net job growth, higher taxes, out-migration, and a continued slide into mediocrity. So the real spoilers, as I said, are Ned and Bob, and Monty and I provide a genuine third option to reinvigorate Connecticut, and to the question you asked at the beginning, to restore Connecticut to national preeminence on all quality of life issues. That's the goal, and that's what Monty and I will provide in terms of the leadership.
Now, the Republican Stefanowski is calling, as you mentioned, for ridding the state of the income and corporate business tax. That would be 55% of state revenues. You're calling to reduce the personal income tax down to 4.5%. What are your thoughts on his plan versus yours?
Well, first of all, I just want to be clear. We said that's the goal. In the near term, we got a $4.5 billion operating deficit, Jim. And anybody who thinks you're going to close that gap with personal income tax cuts or corporate income tax cuts in the near term, I'd be happy to sell you a couple of bridges. This is utter nonsense that we're talking about. And Ned's options are no better. They're poll-tested concepts that appeal. Who wouldn't want to get rid of the personal income tax? We'd all be saluting that. That's a wonderful goal. But when it represents, as you said, over 50% of the total revenue stream at a time when we've got a $4.6 billion operating deficit and $80 billion unfunded liability, I don't believe that's what's going to change growth. Our statement has been that every decision we make, Jim, will be evaluated through the prism of whether that decision enhances Connecticut's ability to get 200,000 net new jobs in the private sector over the next 10 years. And the complaint that most people have in the state, yes, they complain about taxes. We all complain about taxes. But what really angers people is how the money is spent. Not spent on transportation, not spent on education, but rather spent on supporting a benefit plan for state workers that we don't fund. We kick the can down the road. We're not being honest with them. And we're not being honest with the taxpayers. So how the money is spent is the key thing. And yes, over time, would we like to get that rate down? Absolutely. But the issue is getting structural change in the state that will get us back to, as I said a second ago, national preeminence.
We talked about Stefanowski. Some say that Ned Lamont will have difficulty with, as a Democrat, tackling that $80 billion unfunded state pension and health care. Do you feel do you have a plan for that?
Well, what we've said on our website, and I encourage people to go there, osforgovct.com, we've laid out a lot of specific steps. And this is a long-winded answer, and I'll try to be very crisp on this, Jim. We've got to convince folks that we've got a serious, particularly current retirees in the state and state employees and teachers, that we have a serious undermining of our obligation to honor that $80 billion responsibility. Both funds, the teacher retirement fund and the state employee retirement fund, is funded at about 30% of what actuaries projected should be. It's essentially bankrupt. And if we don't get structural change in the state, including talking with current retirees about eliminating or reducing the COLA adjustment, making a greater increase in their contribution to their health plans, we're not going to get restore the confidence in the private sector that the jobs that are here today will stay here. Without net job growth in the state, significant net job growth, we will not generate the revenues to honor the obligations. And so having structural change, bringing the CBAC agreement that's now out to 2027 back to 2020 when the unions come back to negotiate on their base compensation and work rules, has to be part of this discussion so that we can honor the obligations, but eliminate this pitting of retirees against 3-year-olds, which is where we are today. Yes, there are several things beyond what I just said, potentially contributing the lottery to one of those retirement funds, securitizing state-owned real estate, not the public parks and open space, but contributing the proceeds of that to one of the funds in exchange for changes in work rules so we can privatize certain services that we want to fund but don't have to be delivered by state employees, and that we look to move current state employees to a defined contribution plan sooner rather than later, rather than continue to fund a defined or underfund a defined benefit plan.
Okay, we got about 30 seconds, so lightning round. Tolls, yes or no?
Yes.
Statewide property tax?
No.
$15 an hour wage?
Not in the near term. Not in the near term.
Lockbox transportation?
Yes.
All right, we've been talking to the independent candidate, Oz Griebel. We'll have Bob Stefanowski on. Oz, thanks for running as an independent, giving us another choice, and thanks for calling in.
Appreciate it, Jim. Thanks for the opportunity.